Welcome to Dr. Lottie's Science with Soul, the podcast that transcends the boundaries between science and spirituality. Prepare to be uplifted, transformed, and awakened to create a path to healing your own life physically, emotionally, and spiritually by bridging the gap between science and soul. Welcome to Dr. Lottie's Science with Soul. Today's guests are Gregory and Gail Hoag, who are leaders in the world of sacred geometry. They are best-selling authors of Sacred Geometry, the Universal Language of Divine Alignment. With over 4 decades of dedicated expertise in the realm of sacred geometry, they have pioneered groundbreaking technologies and new discoveries that have transformed the lives of tens of thousands across the globe with their teaching and tools. They have harnessed the power of divine archetypes to amplify higher dimensional energies and elevate the human experience, catalyzing personal and spiritual growth. Through their lifelong dedication, they continue to inspire and guide countless individuals towards a path of higher consciousness, well being, and profound connection. For more information, please visit Metaforms at iconnecttoall.com. So, welcome, Gail and Gregory. It's such an honor to have you both as guests today.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you, Dr. Lottie. We've been looking forward to this.
it's going to be such fun sharing with you because we feel so aligned already.
I just can't wait. We were talking a little bit before we started recording on this podcast, and I just learned that Gail had a near death experience, and it sort of um, was what started her spiritual journey. So, would you like to share your near death experience with the audience?
Absolutely. And, I think where I actually want to start to begin with is that when I was about 3 years old, something happened. It was like I had this epiphany. And being three, I couldn't really put words into it, but I had this striking feeling that I was here for a purpose. And I remember I was outside playing. I ran inside to tell my mother, and she kind of went, "Oh, that's nice, dear." And so obviously she didn't understand what I was going through. So it takes many years sometimes before we really get to understand what some of these experiences and messages are really about. And when I was in my late teens, I got very ill. I had pelvic inflammatory disease, and I went into the hospital, not thinking that I was all that sick, but I kept getting worse and worse and worse until I got to that place where I was like running like very, very high fever and delirious. Nothing was working. They were putting me through all of these intravenous feedings of antibiotics. Nothing was working. And so I saw myself going down this tunnel. And it was amazing because it was totally peaceful. There were all these lights around me. And I saw myself going down. And all of a sudden, as that was happening, I went, "Oh my, I'm leaving this life. I'm leaving my body." And something came over me at that point. And I realized that I still had a choice. I don't know whether you had that experience as well. And I made a very deep choice and said, I have work to do here. I have more of a life that's in front of me, and I really want to put everything into it that I can. So I remember virtually pulling my energy back into my body. And at that point, things changed. My temperature started going down. I started to respond to the treatments. And it took a while before I actually was healed again. However, I made that humongous turn. And what was so profound about that is that because I had previously had a real fear of death, I realized there was nothing to fear. It was really about this beautiful experience, this wholeness, this unity. And as a result, I I embraced death in a very, very different way. And took me then into my spiritual journey because I had to understand what was going on. So that's kind of, what jarred me.
Wow. And then how did you both get into sacred geometry?
Well, excuse me. Um, Basically, I went through a Kundalini experience, a number of them, in late 70s, about 1980 is when it culminated. Um, if your listeners aren't familiar with that, that's a Hindi term where the energy starts flowing up from the earth through the body, in essence, reaching back towards spirit to make that connection. And partially it sounds like a lovely experience. It had many frightening, painful aspects to it. And it went on for years, and it took me a long time to balance it. What set it off was a pyramid that I built with a friend, where back in the late 70s, we spent over 50,000, which today would have been closer to $250,000 on building this 10-foot high pyramid that we took turns sleeping in. And when the energy started moving through me, it was like cold fire. It was at times, I thought this is what it must be like to be schizophrenic, because I was sailing through the universe. I was communicating with non-physical beings. I was having a difficult time relating to my physical body. And I had literally so much energy going through me that in the center of both hands and the center of my feet, I had holes being burned through my flesh. Um, Later on, I've seen in certain sacred drawings, where you have those chakras in the middle of the hands and the middle of the feet be converted to eyes for that light energy that literally was trying to go through my body, and I was not open enough to allow it. That's the issue. So after that calmed down and I started getting information from higher aspects of our being, of my being, and I started building geometries. I didn't know anything about sacred geometry, but I started building what I was being shown. And when I met Gail, it was in a house that I had recently sold, and she was being offered a place to paint there. So I was in the garage looking at a table I had left there, which was leaning against, or her paintings were leaning against the table. And that's when she brought up Bucky Fuller and asked, "Oh, you must know Bucky Fuller." And I said, "No, I don't." But she had been channeling Bucky for a number of months before that.
Yeah, he had recently passed away, and I was very affected by his work. And one of the reasons that he came to mind was that some of his books talk a lot about tetrahedrons. Tetrahedron is a three-dimensional triangle, and he talked about the closest packing of spheres and bringing it into both a scientific and a very strong foundational understanding of universe. And so when Fuller died, when he passed away, I believed that consciousness it continues. It doesn't go away. I mean, we're eternal. And so I put it out to the universe and asked, and I said, I'd love to learn more. I'd love to stay connected with this being and this incredible knowledge that he brought to our planet. And so after sitting and meditating several times, I saw an image of him coming towards me, and just asked if it would be okay for me to receive. And so I just got downloaded with lots of information. And the interesting thing is that it got really technical. And I don't have that science background. And so it got to a point after a number of sessions where I said, this is like my cup runneth over. It's too much just for me. Either stop or send me someone who I can share this with and we can do something with this. Because even though I kind of go out there pretty far, I'm a pretty practical person. I like to have things actually have some grounded reality to all of this. And shortly after I made that request, that's when I saw this character over here bump in, come into my life with this box of these geometries with tetrahedrons. And that's how it all got started. And I heard, in my inner knowing that we were here to do work together. Now, they didn't tell me that we were here to be life partners, because that might have gotten me a little over the top. But knowing that we had worked together, that was manageable. So that's where we started and got going right away. That was back in 1985. And within 4 or 5 months, we decided that we would be married and start our life. We were married and start our life together doing this work that we've been doing now since 1985.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And it turned out I had a card that someone had given me that she had handmade, and with one of her paintings on it. And the person said, you need to meet this person. But I carried it in my wallet for a year. And then once we met, it was the only card I had. I said, this is you. And so universe has lots of backup plans to make things flow the way they should. And I was a little slower than the universe liked.
Maybe it was that, I waited for the right time. That's how I look at it.
It's always perfect, isn't it?
Right? It's always perfect. It's always the right time. But when you saw the card too, it was just also a confirmation. This is the right person, right? So then,
Oh, absolutely.
you've been working with sacred geometry, but I want to just jump to, I know you just came out with a book in January 2024 that's called Sacred Geometry, the Universal Language of Divine Alignment. So tell me about this book. I mean, it looks absolutely amazing. I'm going to read this. I'm definitely going to read this book because it looks just amazing. I can't wait for you to tell us, what is this book about?
Well, the interesting thing, I had to make sure who's talking first. Do you want to say something first?
No,
okay. It starts out talking about consciousness, because that's where everything comes from. Well, we literally start telling our stories, how we got there. Then we speak to consciousness, and then what's disrupting consciousness in this world that we've created, especially with all the technologies that are going on around us right now, that disrupt our connection to higher self, our connection to soul. And so then we go into talking about the archetypes that universe uses, starting with the numbers themselves. The divine masculine and feminine are where it all starts, with the 1 and the 2 and the way they interact with reality. And like all the numbers have aspects, qualities that have gender to them. So it isn't just this cold thing of, I didn't do well in school with math, so I'm not going to like this. We're talking about how things come together in the universe. And then it gets more and more detailed, where we start talking about how energy flows. And energy flows through harmonics, relationship. And everything in universe follows these amazing relationships. And we show that in our book, where even the sun and the moon and the earth all have particular numerical relationships, have geometric relationships, and adding their diameters together, the sun and the moon, you get certain geometries. And the moon and the earth, you get other geometries, like this one next to me. And so when you work with the way things are constructed in the universe and then build geometries that act like antenna systems, they can start to vibrate with those energies. And so the point of the book is to show where we really want to go in consciousness, how we're inhibited, and how universe has created these archetypes that we can follow. Just like when we go into nature and sit next to a stream and we feel the sun and we listen to the birds singing, there's something that puts us in a space of, ah, I feel that connection. I feel what's natural. I feel what's real. And so that's what we're able to do with the tools that we build, is create relationships that people can feel, so that then they start to feel that connection to their soul, to higher self. And once that starts to flow, all kinds of amazing things start happening in people's lives.
Something that I feel very strongly about is that we're living in an environment where people feel disconnected. You know, there's so much out there where there's fear, there's just so much that seems to separate people, and people from nature, people from each other, people from their spiritual selves, whatever it is. That separation is really working against us. And what works for us is unity. And one of the things that I love about sacred geometry is it expresses that unity. It helps us to understand how we do belong, how everything is constructed, because we start out as pure energy, this formless matter that we can't quite, put our fingers on. It's hard sometimes to bring words to all of this. And so we bring different analogies and all kinds of things like that. But what's important here is that sacred geometry shows us those reference points. It talks about the rhythms, the cycles, the patterns, the way that energy comes into this physical realm. It comes from a higher vibration and then brings itself into this density. And it does it in very predictable ways. And so rather than wandering around the universe going, where do I belong? I can remember doing that when I was a little child, thinking, I think I got dropped off at the wrong corner. And
Right.
instead, understanding that the universe is a structure that embraces us, that encompasses us. And at the bottom of it is love. And that's what's really important with our book. When we talk about all these different mathematical things and structure and function and all this good stuff, it's all about consciousness. Consciousness cannot be extracted from the world, from sacred geometry, from all the things that we're talking about. And that consciousness at its very core is love. When we realize that, we can relax. We can start to see each other in a more loving and compassionate way. So that's one of the things that I love about it. And I think Gregory's going to show you a
Well,
little bit about some of the mathematical things that go within it. And by the way, sacred geometry is something that is historically has made its mark for, you know, tens of thousands and maybe millions of years. And when you go back into whether it's looking at ancient Greece or Egypt or some of these, the Mayan architecture and other architecture that's being discovered now, there's something there where those beings, and maybe they came from another higher level, hard to know, but they understood that when they built things in a certain way, they offered an environment to people that supported them in the connections, the very basic connections that humanity thrives with.
Just fascinating. So, how does this, so when you talk about the consciousness, is that universal consciousness, divine source, or our own consciousness?
All of it. It's all one, isn't it? And you know, when we like to talk about how unity, everything really is one. When we start trying to divide things up, that's where it gets tricky. You know, you take, I mean, it's something as simple as an apple, and you go, all right, I want to try and understand what the apple is. I think I'll cut it in half. Do you actually get a chance to understand the apple more? Well, you understand certain things about the apple, but it's not until you bite into it, until you experience it, until you allow it to really express itself to you, that you understand what that apple is really about. And so consciousness is something that it's, you know, when you divide it up and you try to put it into these precise words, it takes away from the essence of it. But if you're a meditator, if you're somebody that is just exploring nature and open to feeling the oneness of it and the sounds of the birds and the feeling of the breeze on your skin and the gurgling waters, if you're open to that, you understand that oneness. There's nothing there that's separate from anything else when it all comes down to it. But it gets expressed in so many different ways. It's really quite wonderful.
Excuse me for popping in for a second, but the consciousness that we often think of is, okay, I'm awake today, I'm conscious, and at night I'm unconscious. Actually, probably about 60 or so years ago now, I started meditating during the dream state, and it shifted my dream state when I brought that level of awareness into what should, or what often is referred to as unconscious. And another way to understand it is that we're very focused on these characters, on this physical. And you've had, you know, some expanded experiences. We all have, many of us have. And so let me share a picture of a metaphor that is more of what we're really like. It's like we're like an iceberg where the majority of us is hidden. It's hidden on these higher dimensional levels. And so I flipped the iceberg over just to carry the metaphor deeper into energy flows from soul, from source, through all these different aspects of our being before it gets into that little tip where everybody's relating to each other from, you know, that tip of the iceberg. But the emotional part happens on a higher dimensional level. And some people can see auras and the emotions around the body, but it's invisible to many of us, as are our thoughts and what's going on mentally. So the thing is, that energy flow is important to maintain from source through all those aspects of our being. And another metaphor is like the ship pumping oxygen to the deep sea diver, where we are totally dependent upon soul. If soul pulls the plug, we are out of here. It's that disconnection that is what's referred to as death. And another thing we talked about are all the things that come in between. And that's where we were referring to the electromagnetic pollution, the stress, negative emotions, toxins, judgments, and beliefs. All these things disrupt that flow and limit our consciousness, because our consciousness has the ability to expand from this little body to those higher levels of being. We can more thoroughly understand our emotions and sometimes sidestep some of the things we might say or do as we become more in control of our emotional body or our mental body and the things that cause stress. I mean, the more connected you are to these higher aspects of your being, there's less and less reason for stress. Even the things that happen in one's life, and that's recently we've had some, really intense things happen. But when I ask Spirit, is this your intent to have us do this in response to that? And I hear yes. If I were simply going with that tip of the iceberg, which is what we call ego, because the ego is what's invested in this reality. It's invested in our personality. And if anyone takes a chip at it, we react negatively. We react hurt. We react angrily. All kinds of emotions that get wrapped up in the little bit of our being. So I think on the bigger sense, what we're talking about is consciousness is expanding to the fullness of your being so that you're able to relate to soul, know what you're being asked to do, and not being blocked by all these less important things in the tip of the iceberg, our little physical reality.
Now, you mentioned the electromagnetic field and how that interferes with our own vibrations. Now, how do we get away from that? I mean, I'm thinking, I live in the middle of Phoenix. I'm sure there's like 800 cell towers within 3 miles and et cetera, right? Because I'm in a big city. How do we protect ourselves from that? I mean, you can't really get away from it unless you go off the grid, which is even hard to do today.
It is. It's very hard to do. We're in the mountains, and so we are a little bit out of it, but not fully. But let me respond to one thing, because a lot of people will ask us, how do we protect ourselves from the electromagnetics? And the first thing that I always say is, when we think about protection, we're coming at it through fear. So let's turn that around. We can't cut out all of those electromagnetic frequencies, because then we wouldn't be able to do this right now, would we? But what really is powerful is our connection. When we are connected, that connection overcompensates for all of the other things that are there. Now, what's interesting about like the electromagnetics is that they're trying to, in some ways, like dominate and block out what else is there. Think about the whole spectrum of what's there. It's huge. What we want to do is we want to enable those higher levels and the natural levels to come through. So the tools that we've created are creating certain harmonics. They're resonating with what it is that we want to stay connected to. And that becomes a stronger aspect, And so that balances out the electromagnetics, the other things that are there. It doesn't wipe it out. So even like we'll have certain things that we have, like we have this particular motor called the causal generator that people have absolutely loved. And it is revolving at a certain time, a certain speed and rate, and you can sit different geometries on it. And that vibrational field is going out into the room. Now, what's going on in the room is still going on there, but that harmonic is stronger. And particularly when we use our consciousness to connect in with it, that's what really gets us into that place of health and balance.
Wow. What was that called?
That one is called the causal generator.
Causal generator.
And yeah, and we have a website, iconnecttoall.com, where we have all these different tools that we've created over these years. And they support people's energy, the environment in a home, in an office, in a healing center, wherever, so that we don't have to come at it from how do we get rid of those problems. Instead, how do we accentuate the balance, the harmonics that support us in a healthy way.
And the image on the far right of this picture at the very base, that's the causal generator that she's referring to down there, that's spinning a form above it. And so all these forms, as they spin and move, they affect the field and the energy going on in that field. And so that is what we mean by shifting the energy. It's such a classic issue. And surrounding yourself with a wall, it didn't work for the Chinese with their Great Wall. It never worked for any of the medieval kings. Always there's a breakdown when you're coming at things from that perspective of fear and protection. And so we need to rise above and connect with what's real, because that's what's being offered to us in our lives right now.
And I believe that's what's happening. There's so many people, you know this, that are waking up. And that is reshaping the world that we're living in and all of the things that are evolving now. It's a very exciting time.
Oh, it definitely is. And so, I mean, everything is vibrating, right? So these geometric things, what should I call them, that you make, they literally like changing the vibrational frequencies in the room then, or?
Yes, they literally are. And we also have things like these pendants that have about 35 antenna systems inside, circuit boards, oscillating crystals, so different frequencies, the geometries on the outside. We found a way to take three-dimensional geometry, which gathers energy like an antenna system, and project it into a two-dimensional antenna. And so we're working with many different things that are working with energies that you can have on your body, and it shifts your body right away. Someone who's sensitive to energy can literally feel it the moment I put it in their hand or I put it on their body. And so this pendant, I'll go back to it. It looks like there are two different sides to one pendant, and that's what it is. It's not two different pendants. And the reason it has two sides is that the body has energy constantly flowing through it, either down, like, a big torus, a big donut where the energy is flowing down, or it's flowing up. And there are different reasons to have yourself more grounded, connected to the earth, or raising the energy and be more mentally focused and higher connected. And by flipping that pendant over, almost everyone that I have it in their hand and they're feeling the energy, they can feel when I turn it over. So it's shifting the field in the body. And I always use kinesiology, that is muscle testing, to show people how if they have negative thoughts and I test them, they go very weak. But if I put this pendant close to their body or I have them hold it, they go strong. And if they hold a cell phone next to them, or they have maybe a packet of sweet and low, I probably shouldn't use that, but something in their hand that isn't good for their body, they will go weak. But when we bring the pendant in, they are strong. That means that they're connected. Often it doesn't mean you can eat this stuff. You still should watch what you eat. You still should meditate every day, connect, all these things that we know to be good for us. But the point is, the way things really start affecting us negatively over time is through disconnecting us from soul, from spirit. Ultimately, that's the reason for all disease and all difficulty. It's that somewhere in the chain of who I am, from soul into full manifestation here in this dimension, I've disrupted things. Maybe I'm stressed on some level, mentally, maybe emotionally. I am angry and not letting go about something. Eventually, it shows up in the physical with disease or difficulty. And it's up to us to understand where that started and start to heal it. And with these tools, they are all supports to get us into that place of connection. And then it's easier to understand, oh, how this happened. It makes a little more sense. Or the intuition, comes up a few notches. The ability to work through things faster becomes easier when we're working with these tools, because it's like we keep saying, being in nature. It's having that ability to relax, step back and go, oh, it's just my life. I don't have to take it so personally. And we get so caught up in this character, we get so worried about things, it becomes a painful experience rather than saying, oh, I can do this. It's not such a terrible experience after all. We do that with kids so easily. We say, this is what you should do, but we have a hard time hearing that for ourselves. And that's hopefully what we all start doing more and more with each other as we connect to the bigger part of ourselves and start listening to soul, which has some very good ideas, but it's hard for us to hear them. You went through some near-death experiences, Gail did. I went through Kundalini to shake us up and allow us to hear a little more fully what's coming from spirit through our heart center. I think that's the doorway into this world, is our heart chakra.
It's so fascinating. So all these different geometrical shapes, how would somebody, like for the listeners, if they think, well, I tend to have a lot of stress in my life, or I tend to be anxious, or I have this chronic illness that I can't get rid of. I wonder if this is something that could help me. So if they go on your website, are there certain things that they should be looking for, or things that you feel could help them?
Well, we usually suggest that the first thing people do is consider one of the pendants, because they can have it with them all the time and wear it on their body over their heart chakra. And so that's a great place to start. And I mean, we've had experiences with people that are 911 operators that have seen their lives change and the stress levels go down. We've had prison guards tell us that prisoners in high security prisons start treating them better when they're wearing these, because it changes your field. We had a grandmother that said, my grandkids used to run away from me, and now, since wearing your pendant, they crawl all over me. They're attracted to the energy. And so even if you don't notice it at first, your significant other may. I mean, it's like I had this one couple come in that were, I think, in their late 70s, early 80s, and they bought some pendants. A couple weeks later, they were back to buy something else because they went, wow, this works. We want to try something that will shift our home. And he leaned over and he said, what I like about the pendant is my wife doesn't yell at me as much anymore. And she overheard us and looked at him and said, I don't have to. So they both shifted their reality, and together it was such an uplifting, positive experience for both of them.
Yeah, just that's fun. I mean, it's just fascinating how we are all, tied into these geometrical shapes. So I have so many questions here. So let me see. Um, how does your work help foster spiritual growth?
Well, I think that that's a lot of what we've been talking about, that it supports us in those divine connections. When we're connected, it all flows. And it makes it easier to do some of the things that support us, like even meditating. We have people that work with some of these different structures or are wearing the pendant, and they can relax more into a meditation. A lot of people say they have trouble meditating because I think they have certain expectations. When we let go of that and we just show up, we just are, things start to happen. And these tools help that along. We have a special form that we love to meditate under called the Merkaba of Oneness. And if someone wants to see it on our website, they will. And I find that for me, it just helps me just elevate, bring up that energy and go to such a deep, high place really, really quickly. So, sometimes in, 10, 15 minutes, I get a really strong, deep meditation that just serves me for that day. It's wonderful. So, people will feel all these different things. Another thing that's really interesting is that these are structures that are representing nature, how nature is created. And so sometimes people will recognize these images. It's like, oh, I saw that in a dream, or I saw that in a meditation, or whatever. There's a recognition that there's something there. And I think that's really important to pay attention to. It supports intuition. And that's a part of us that I think is so critical in our spiritual growth, that we listen to that inner voice, that we do the things that accelerate our ability to work with it. And our tools are absolutely wonderful with that. I remember when we were first designing the pendant, and I've always been a very intuitive person. And when I first put that pendant on, I spent the next couple of days and went, whoa. I mean, like my intuition, that quality of being able to hear and know just accelerated drastically, tremendously. So these are, again, they're putting us into that resonance so that we can work with the qualities that are really just natural to who we are.
And I was reaching over to lift this up. This particular form, we move it over the body, kind of in circles, figure eights, and it opens up the chakras. It moves energy in. It helps to balance the body and clear things out. And something that is also important that it does, you can take intent, words, and moving through it, it works like a filter to upgrade the energy. So I'm going to do an experiment to just see if maybe you can notice this coming through right now. If I send you love and healing, and then when I start talking through here to send you love and healing, could you feel a little difference when I sent you love through this geometry?
Actually, I did. I felt,
Isn't that interesting?
yes, I felt energy actually going up from the bottom of the sacrum and up. I felt an energetic rising of energy.
And let's, if you start focusing on that spiral into your heart, you can open the heart and allow that love to come up and move and just feel that energy
Mhm.
moving upwards.
Yep. I honestly feel it. Yeah.
Isn't that curious
Yeah.
that over this distance,
Yeah.
this this geometry is capable of shifting the energy? And it's more than,
Mhm.
it's like taking our thoughts and crystallizing them on another level of being. And
Mhm.
so for people that have aches and pains, this helps a lot for relieving pain
Mhm.
because it opens up flow of energy. And so often, pain is blocked energy. It's where we're knotted up.
Mhm.
And that's an interesting way of the double entendre of knotting, because, it's not only tied up, but it's not available for flow. It's not available for experience. It's not available for connection.
Mhm.
And it's just remarkable what can be done. And so it's fun. Thank you for being such a good patient in my experience.
I love it. It's fascinating because, you wonder what medicine is going to look like 50 or 100 years from now, because I feel like there's, we're learning so much about the fact that we're just energy in the end. And, how do we really heal people? Western medicine is great at saving a life, but other than that, it's not so great at any kind of chronic disease, right? So you have to branch out. And I always tell people, you got to just do it all because it's in your physical, but you also have to add the energetic and spiritual and emotional component in order to create that healing. But the geometrical shapes is just, a wonderful opportunity to create that healing and to tune into that, because we are energetic beings and we come from that. We are part of that.
Absolutely.
Modern medicine, they are incredible mechanics, but
Yeah.
again, they're focusing on the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
That's not the fullness of who we are. And so I think for any of us that start seeing anything that's creating separation or working with fear, let's step back and find a more expansive way, a more loving way, a more connected way, because that's when we're going to be closer, I think, to the path that's going to be supporting us.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And for people who are watching this on YouTube, and for people who are listening to this on one of the audio channels like iTunes, Spotify, you might want to take a look at the YouTube because they have all these great slides that they have been showing us in different geometrical shapes. So if you're curious as to what they're talking about and you're just listening to this, then jump onto the YouTube so you can take a look at all these wonderful geometrical shapes. And you have 3 geometrical shapes on the screen that has been hanging. What are those 3 shapes that we're seeing on the screen?
Well, remember how I said there were some things about the way the moon and the earth related to each other? Well, let me take you into that right now. And very quickly, these are the Platonic solids, these different colored shapes. There are only 5 of them. But if you take the number of degrees in these top 3 and you add it together, you get the diameter of the sun. The next 4 exactly equals the diameter of the earth. And the cube is the diameter of the moon. Now, if you take some of these, like the diameter of the moon and the diameter of the earth, added together, they equal this geometry on the right. And that's this geometry right here that is working with the phi ratio, which, well, let me show you. The phi ratio is the way the body's constructed. That means that when we see these spirals of everything from sunflower seeds to a nautilus shell, they are working with the same proportions that the human body all the way down to the DNA is working with this proportion, this ratio. And so that means the moon and the earth are dancing with their diameters to work with this geometry that has the same number of degrees as the total of the diameter of the earth and the moon. So it's resonant with the earth and the moon, and it's resonant with the way our body's created. So when this is spinning or working under a form that's spinning, it can work with those same vibrations and work with healing and work with bringing your body into order. Then you bring your intent into all of these, because when the energy's there, it's what are you going to do with it? What would you like to do with it? And I'm sure that's what you've seen in all of your work, is that a person's intent and focus is always paramount. And this form up here, that form is working with 4 bands, which is working with basically a structure that is actually similar to the one above, which is the way everything is constructed in the universe. It's built around something called a cube octahedron, which is a geometry that's working with a cube and an octahedron together. And this has the same number of degrees as you'll find an icosahedron. And if you break it down into the number of degrees that's in a circle or a square, they both relate to each other. One's heaven, one's earth, but they're both 360. And actually, the number of days in a sacred year that all the ancients worked with is 360 days. So you see, harmonics start getting set up with all of these things. It's there in our sacred literature. Actually, During a leap year, I Googled what is day 360 in our year, and it comes out to be December 25th, because that day was chosen to be celebratory of Christ's birth, but it was laid over another time that was called Saturnia, a time of when the year slowly came to its end and a new year was beginning. So all these ancient things hidden in these different sacred texts that we read about and we hear about, oh, so many beads in a mala bead from the East, 108, yet in the Catholic Church, it's exactly half, 54. These are numbers that are working with this geometry because they're working with the way the body's created. They're working with the energy of life itself. And yet we look at these things in these sacred texts and we read about it and we don't realize where have they come from, but some ancient knowledge that we believe existed before the deluge over 9,600 years ago, when the earth had some close encounters with celestial, what I mean to say, actually comets that were breaking off and going into the ice caps that were much lower at that time. And that happened about 12,000 years ago, and again around 9,600. And so whatever culture existed, civilization existed before that time was destroyed. But a lot of these ancient numbers and figures and thoughts about working with energy survived in all these cultures, from the Sumerians to the Asians to the Egyptians to the Mayans. We'll see similar numbers and similar geometries. And so that's talked about in our book a little bit too.
Well, it's just been wonderful to have you both as guests on the podcast. How can people learn more about sacred geometry and learn more about your work?
A great way is to get our book, which has just been published in January, and that is Sacred Geometry, the Universal Language of Divine Alignment. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. We also are beginning to sell the paperback on our website. And you can go to our website. We have a special page about the book. That's iconnecttoall.com/book. The website is iconnect2all.com. And you can see our different products. We have lots of videos that we've done on YouTube. We've done classes. We have all kinds of things. We're getting on a lot of podcasts now and having fun sharing this information with people all over the planet. So yeah, our website is a great place to learn. And the book, it goes through so much of, Gregory was just, and I were just beginning to give you little tidbits of what you'll find in the book, and lots of visuals. We have like 72 art slides in there. And you'll see at the very end, we do talk about our products and show you what they are and how we've come about learning what they are and designing them. So we give away some of those little secrets too.
That's just wonderful. And my last question is, what is the meaning of life?
Oh, goodness.
You're going to get two answers.
Oh, gosh.
I'm
Do
ready.
you want to start first?
That's such a great, what a great question. I so enjoy your questions, Dr. Lottie. The meaning of life is, I think, when it comes down to it, it's about love. And everyone who you asked, I bet you get lots of different answers. to me, the meaning of life is exploring the magnificence of what is here, who we are at every level of our being. We are multidimensional beings, and I believe we're being really blessed to have the opportunity to learn more about that, interact with people more about that, and play at a much higher level than we were able to many years ago. So we can incorporate in our physical lives, mind, body, spirit, bring in the magnificent energy of soul. And what we've discovered with our book is that there is such alignment and beauty in the way that this physical realm is created. And it can only be that beautiful because it's a reflection of love. And the more that we engage in that, the more we can grow into what that love means and express our lives in ways of greater love and compassion and health.
I love it. Beautiful answer.
Thank you.
Oh, she didn't leave me much room to
Oh,
add
you,
anything.
I'm sure you're going to come up with
That's,
something.
I'm
know.
sure you'll think of something.
But that is the real beauty of it. I don't have to think of it. That's the joy of being connected to spirit. It just fulfills us with whatever needs to happen at the moment. And, I would say the greater meaning of life for all of us is that opportunity to grow. And that's what Gail is referring to grow in love, to grow in understanding. It's an opportunity to evolve our spiritual awareness, to evolve our spiritual consciousness, which is saying the same thing that she's saying. It's like we're here, and it's like it's so wonderful to realize that we are here and there is a purpose, and that purpose can be so unique for each one of us, and yet it is the same for all of us because we are connected. And as we evolve in our connection to spirit, we evolve in our connection to unity, to that place that we are all dissolving into more and more. And universe celebrates the diversity of what's coming back into connection with all, so that we can express that love in all those multifaceted ways that we didn't even know was possible when we were younger. But as we get older and older, we keep going, yeah, there's more and more that I could be doing. And so I want to explore that.
I love it. Beautiful answer as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to be a guest on the podcast today. It was a pure pleasure to meet both of you.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
Really
yes.
enjoyed getting to know you and love to hear more about your story too. We'll need to check out more.
Yes, indeed.
As we conclude this episode, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude for your presence within our community. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with friends and family. Subscribe to my newsletter in the show notes and receive new podcast episodes delivered right to your inbox. If you resonate with the interconnectedness of mind, body, and soul, and are motivated to embark on a journey of personal healing, I invite you to connect with me at drlottie.com. Together, we can pave a path towards transformative healing in your own life.